Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really getting into the dramatically changed landscape of abortion access here in the U.S. This is all following the Supreme Court's big decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and also Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
That's right. And to help you make sense of this really pivotal moment, we've gathered, well, a whole range of sources.
Yeah, everything from historical analyses, legal docs, socioeconomic research.
Exactly. We've got historical context from Hopkins Bloomberg Public Health magazine, research linking access to economic success from the current, data tracking from KFF.
The Supreme Court's Dobbs decision text itself, analysis of legal fights, Guttmacher reports on state trends.
A study on the unequal impacts from Johns Hopkins, info on trigger laws, even some online discussion about federal versus state power.
So our goal here is to give you a clear picture where things stand now, how we actually got here, and what the potential ripple effects might be.
We want to synthesize all this complex info, point out the key developments and, their likely impacts without overwhelming you.
Okay, let's start by rewinding way back. It might surprise you that for, well, the first 100 years or so of the U.S., abortion wasn't quite the hot-button issue it is today.
It really wasn't. For much of that early history, mirroring practices elsewhere, abortion before quickening, that point where the mother feels movement, it was generally legal.
Yeah.
Not hugely controversial.
Bleeding, right.
Yeah. The prevailing legal idea was that the fetus wasn't legally distinct until then.
Okay, but then things started to shift. And the initial push to outlaw abortion, it wasn't primarily driven by, say, the moral arguments we hear a lot today.
No, not initially. It was largely spearheaded by physicians.
Doctors.
Doctors, really? Why?
Well, it was a time when doctors were really pushing to professionalize, to regulate the medical field, and a big part of that was sidelining midwives.
Oh.
Midwives often provided abortions using, traditional methods, herbal remedies, pessaries, catheter abortions, D&C procedures.
So it was partly about control, establishing dominance in the medical field. Precisely. The American Medical Association, the AMA, founded in 1847, actively campaigned to end abortion. They promoted this idea, which was newer then, that life began right at conception.
Huh. So professional interests were really shaping the debate early on. It wasn't just morality from the get-go.
It's quite revealing, isn't it? And their campaign worked. Between 1860 and 1880, something like 40 state anti-abortion laws were passed.
40? Wow.
And then you had the 1873 Comstock Act, which made it illegal to even mail or sell contraceptives or abortifacients.
But making something illegal doesn't mean it stops happening, right? Abortions continued.
Oh, absolutely not. They continued. Historical sources show that even with bans, some doctors kept performing them, especially during the Depression.
The economic hardship made unwanted pregnancies even tougher, I imagine.
Exactly. And by the 1920s and 30s, you had this sort of underground network of doctors specializing in abortion in cities.
Then came World War II, and another societal shift, a push for women back into traditional roles.
That's right. The post-war era saw this renewed focus on the nuclear family, women in the home. And that led to more legal crackdowns on doctors performing abortions.
Driving it further underground.
Yes, and often into less safe hands. The Guttmacher Institute estimates that in the 50s and 60s, there might have been up to 1.2 million illegal abortions happening each year.
1.2 million. That's staggering.
It is. And tragically, in 1965, about 17% of all reported pregnancy-related deaths were linked to these illegal, unsafe procedures. It really shows the human cost.
A stark reminder of the dangers when safe, legal options aren't available. Then, something unexpected happened, a public health crisis. The rubella outbreak.
Yes, the rubella outbreak in the mid-60s. It caused severe birth defects if contracted during pregnancy. This actually led some states to loosen their therapeutic abortion laws.
But access wasn't equal, I'm guessing.
Not at all. It mostly benefited women with money, with resources. As one expert noted, wealthier women could usually find a way, while working-class women, black women, single women faced much bigger hurdles and risks.
So even public health shifts didn't level the playing field.
No, but this growing awareness of bodily autonomy, the inequality, it did lay some groundwork for later privacy arguments in healthcare, which eventually led to cases like Griswold v. Connecticut.
Right, Griswold in 65. That established the right to privacy for contraception. A key stepping stone, wasn't it?
A crucial one. It paved the way for Roe v. Wade in 1973, which finally recognized abortion itself as a constitutional right.
And then Planned Parenthood v. Casey came along in 1992. It didn't overturn Roe, but it changed things.
It did. Casey upheld the core right to abortion from Roe, but it introduced this idea of fetal viability. It allowed states to regulate abortion before viability, as long as they didn't place an undue burden on the person seeking it.
Undue burden. That sounds like a phrase destined for debate.
Oh, absolutely. It led to endless arguments about defining viability, especially with new tech like sonograms, and what exactly constituted an undue burden.
Which brings us almost up to date. June 2022. A massive shift. The Supreme Court overturns both Roe and Casey. Let's unpack that Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision. It started with a Mississippi law, right? Banning most abortions after 15 weeks.
That's correct. The court took up Mississippi's Gestational Age Act. The majority opinion, written by Justice Alito, made a core argument. The Constitution doesn't explicitly mention abortion.
No mention, therefore no right.
Essentially, yes. They argued no such right is implicitly protected either, not even by the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. The reasoning was that abortion wasn't deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition.
So a very strict reading of history in the text.
Yeah.
If it's not explicitly there or historically infringed, it's not a federal constitutional right.
That was the crux of it. And based on that, they overturned nearly 50 years of precedent set by Roe and Casey.
Returning the power to regulate abortion, where?
Back to the elected branches, meaning state legislatures primarily and potentially the U.S. Congress.
Now, it wasn't a unanimous decision among the justices, was it? Chief Justice Roberts had a different take.
He did. Roberts concurred in the judgment, meaning he agreed the Mississippi law itself could stand, but he disagreed with completely throwing out Roe and Casey. He felt the court could have decided the Mississippi case on narrower grounds.
Didn't need to go that far, in his view.
Right. But the majority did go that far.
And the dissenting justices, Breyer, Kagan, Sotomayor.
They wrote a very strong joint dissent. They argued the decision strips women of fundamental rights, impacts their status as free and equal citizens.
They highlighted the unsettling of decades of established law.
Yes, and warned about the potential impact on other rights linked to bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom. They saw it as a major step backward.
We also had other justices writing concurrences, adding more layers. Kavanaugh.
Justice Kavanaugh, in his concurrence, stressed that the Constitution is neutral on abortion now. He also stated this decision shouldn't affect precedent on things like contraception or same-sex marriage.
But Justice Thomas went further.
He did. Justice Thomas's concurrence took aim at the whole idea of substantive due process.
Which is the basis for many rights not explicitly listed in the Constitution.
Exactly. Rights like contraception use, marriage, and previously abortion. His argument basically questioned the foundation for many established unenumerated rights, which has much broader implications.
Okay, so a real split in legal philosophy on the court. The Dobbs decision comes down. What happened immediately? It sounds like a lot of state laws were just waiting for this moment.
That's exactly what happened. It was like flipping a switch in many states. As of, say, December 2024, the picture was incredibly fragmented.
How fragmented?
Well, we had 13 states enforcing near-total abortion bans. Another 28 states had bans based on how far along the pregnancy was.
And these were often trigger laws.
Yes, trigger laws passed specifically to take effect if Roe fell, plus some old pre-Roe bans that suddenly became enforceable again, and other new restrictions. It instantly changed the map. Think of them as preloaded legal changes.
Dominoes falling.
Pretty much.
And the immediate effect was people having to travel for care.
Dramatically so. Interstate travel for abortion care basically doubled between 2020 and 2023.
Doubled.
Which puts immense strain on clinics in states where it's still legal. And think about the burden on individuals, especially those with limited money. Travel costs, time off work, childcare. It adds up fast.
We also saw some states pushing for even earlier bans, like 6-week bans.
Yes. Places like Florida and Iowa started enforcing 6-week bans. That's a point where many people don't even realize they're pregnant yet.
And the legal challenges just kept coming, creating confusion.
Absolutely. In states like North Dakota, Georgia, bans were challenged, sometimes paused by courts, then reinstated. It creates this constant uncertainty, which itself restricts access because people don't know what the rules are day to day.
It really does paint a picture of instability and, well, profoundly unequal access. Okay, let's broaden out. What about the wider socioeconomic effects? Our sources link abortion access to, well, economic well-being.
Yeah, the research there is pretty consistent. When women have control over their reproductive health, over if and when they have children, it seems to open doors.
Doors to education, Financial stability.
Exactly. Studies show links between abortion access and women being more likely to finish high school, finish college, earn higher incomes, and just have more financial security overall.
So logically, restricting access would likely have the opposite effect.
That's the expectation, yes. It's predicted to lead to poorer economic outcomes for women and their families, and it tends to hit hardest those already facing disadvantages: teen mothers, women with low incomes.
Our sources also mention single mothers and women of color being disproportionately impacted.
Yes, the economic fallout isn't evenly distributed. Those groups often face greater barriers to begin with.
And this ties into the level of social support available, right?
Mhm.
The U.S. isn't exactly known for robust support for parents compared to some other developed nations.
Wow. That's a really important point one source makes. The relative lack of things like affordable childcare, guaranteed paid leave. It makes navigating an unintended pregnancy much harder. Limiting abortion access in that context can trap people in cycles of poverty or prevent them from reaching their educational or career goals.
So while the public debate often centers on morality, there are these really tangible economic consequences for individuals and families that we can't ignore. Okay, so Dobbs happened, but the legal fights didn't stop there, did they? People are still challenging these state bans.
Definitely. The legal battles are ongoing. Challenges are being filed in many states,
On what grounds?
often based on state constitutions, arguments around rights to privacy, sometimes religious freedom arguments. Interestingly, some state courts seem open to the idea that a state constitutional right to make healthcare decisions does include abortion.
And we've also seen a big rise in using ballot initiatives, right? Taking the question directly to voters.
Yes, that's become a major strategy. Direct democracy in action. In the November 2024 elections, voters in 7 states actually approved measures to protect or expand abortion access.
7 states. It's significant, but it's not always successful. Florida was an example.
Right. In Florida, the initiative got majority support, over 50%, but it didn't meet the state's very high 60% threshold needed to amend the Constitution. So, majority will doesn't always translate into policy change there.
But where they have passed, these initiatives make a real difference.
Oh, yes. In places like Michigan, Ohio, Nevada, successful ballot measures have led to courts blocking existing restrictions. Sometimes they've even resulted in abortion rights being added explicitly to the state constitution or through equal rights amendments. It really shows citizens directly shaping the law on this.
Still, despite those wins for access in some states, it sounds like the push to restrict abortion further hasn't stopped.
No, it definitely hasn't. Even in states that already have bans, there are ongoing efforts to make them even stricter.
Like trying to criminalize things related to pregnancy.
There have been attempts, yes. Things like criminalizing actions taken during pregnancy. None of those specific bills passed in 2024, but the attempts continue. We've also seen a big jump in state funding for anti-abortion centers, often called crisis pregnancy centers, in restrictive states.
And we're seeing connections drawn to other healthcare issues, like gender-affirming care.
That's a concerning trend, yes. Bans on gender-affirming care for trans youth have passed in many states. And in some legal arguments defending those bans, the Dobbs decision, its reasoning, has actually been cited.
Wow. So the Dobbs reasoning is being applied elsewhere.
Potentially. We're also seeing more laws about parental involvement for minors' health care, not just abortion, but contraception too.
And these abortion support bans, targeting people who help minors travel.
Yes. Laws like those passed in Idaho and Tennessee aimed at holding people liable, legally responsible, if they help a minor travel out of state for an abortion without parental consent.
Have those held up in court.
They've faced challenges and been partially blocked. But just having them on the books creates this climate of fear, for abortion funds, for people trying to help.
And Louisiana classifying medication abortion pills as controlled substances, that sounds like it goes beyond just abortion access.
It absolutely does. It creates huge hurdles for miscarriage management, for emergency obstetric care, where those same medications are sometimes vital. It really restricts physicians' ability to provide necessary care.
It feels like a broad effort to restrict reproductive health care from multiple angles. Okay, let's talk about who is most affected by these bans. The impact isn't equal, is it?
No, tragically it's not. The sources really highlight major disparities. Research is showing that states with bans have seen increases not just in live births, but also, alarmingly, in infant deaths.
Infant deaths have increased.
Yes. One study found about a 6% overall increase in infant mortality in banned states, but it was an 11% increase among non-Hispanic Black infants.
11% for Black infants. That's
Yeah.
devastating.
It's truly sobering. The biggest jumps were seen in states like Texas and Kentucky. It underscores the very real, unequal human cost.
So it's not just preventing abortions, it's potentially worsening survival odds for infants born in those states, especially in certain communities. Who else is disproportionately affected?
The data points strongly to racially minoritized individuals, people without a college degree, those who rely on Medicaid, unmarried individuals, younger people, and people living in the South.
Often the same groups who already face worse health outcomes.
Exactly. These bans seem to be hitting hardest in communities already facing significant health and economic challenges. It raises serious questions about widening existing health inequities.
So the fear is these bans could actually reverse progress made in reducing infant mortality for vulnerable groups.
That is a major concern. And more births in disadvantaged populations without adequate support can lead to negative mental and economic health effects for those families down the line.
Is research looking at maternal mortality too?
Yes, research is ongoing into the impact on maternal mortality and morbidity as well. It's a critical area to watch.
It's a very troubling picture of the real-world impacts and who's bearing the brunt. Okay, finally, let's tackle the federal versus state law puzzle. Roe set a federal standard. Now that's gone. What could happen at the federal level now?
It's complicated legally and politically. Generally, the Constitution's supremacy clause means federal law trumps conflicting state law. That's how Roe worked.
But can the federal government actually regulate abortion directly? Is that power clear?
That's where the debate lies. Regulating healthcare directly isn't one of the powers explicitly given to the federal government in the Constitution. So a federal law trying to ban abortion nationwide or protect it nationwide would likely face major legal challenges over whether Congress even has that authority.
What about amending the Constitution itself?
That would be the most definitive way, yes. An amendment either banning abortion or explicitly protecting it. But as Einline discussions point out, amending the Constitution is incredibly hard.
Very high bar to clear.
Extremely high. You need 2/3 of both the House and Senate, then ratification by 3/4 of the states. It rarely happens.
So short of a constitutional amendment or a potentially challengeable federal law, are there other federal actions possible?
There are other strategies discussed, things like federal laws protecting the right to travel between states for care, or ensuring access to medication abortion through the mail.
On the flip side, could the federal government try to restrict access further?
Potentially, yes. Maybe by trying to restrict mailing abortion pills nationwide using federal powers, like regulating the postal service or interstate commerce, or maybe withholding federal funds from states that allow abortion. But again, any of these federal moves would likely end up in court and face huge political fights.
And even if a federal law passed, enforcing it against resistant states could be tricky.
Exactly. Enforcement could be a challenge, and you might see states actively resisting federal mandates, leading to more legal battles.
So it seems the legal and political tug-of-war over abortion in the U.S. is far from over. State versus federal power is the key tension.
Precisely. Overturning Roe really just opened a new, very dynamic, and frankly unpredictable chapter in this long story.
Well, this deep dive certainly shows a deeply fractured, rapidly changing situation for abortion in the U.S. The end of Roe really has set off this cascade of state policies. What we have now is this stark patchwork of access leading to significant gaps in health outcomes, economic outcomes, especially hitting communities that were already marginalized.
And that ongoing tension, that debate over federal versus state power just adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It really does. As the legal fights and the political moves continue, the long-term effects, well, we just don't fully know yet. They're still unfolding.
It's a situation very much in flux.
Yeah. And it makes you think about the growing focus on state constitutions, on these ballot initiatives as maybe potential backstops, potential safeguards for abortion access. What role do you think those state-level actions will ultimately play in shaping the future of reproductive rights here? It's definitely something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.